Welcome back, friends, to another wonderfully not manga-related episode of Animanga. I'm Drew, never learned to read Brown, or, well, his voice, I guess. And today I have something special for you. What is it, you may ask? Well, I was told for this episode I was supposed to talk about something not slice of life in nature, so let's talk about Serial Experiments Lain.
And you don't seem to understand. A shame you seemed an honest man.
Alright, so I've been thinking about the show for a while. It's been talked about for so long and by so many people that I was kind of hesitant to review it simply because I didn't know if I'd be able to do it justice. There's just so much to describe and analyze, but I'll try to give the short version here. Let's start with a basic outline. So Lain is this girl with the funny hair thing on the side there. At the start of the story, Lain hears some of her classmates talking about how they received a strange email from a recently deceased classmate. It's definitely strange because, well, she's deceased. This sparks Lain's interest and she dusts off her old 20th anniversary Macintosh and checks her email, and sure enough, there's an email. In the email, the deceased classmate describes to Lain that she's not really dead and that she continues to live on inside of a place called The Wired. Lain then gets really interested in computers, called Navies in the show, and asks her dad to get her a shiny new one, which leads to the strange events that happen after. Honestly, that's all I can really give you about the plot. Let me explain why. Serial Experiments Lain is a very peculiar piece of media because Lain herself is often depicted questioning her own existence and even reality. Lain is shown having illusions and hallucinations that are definitely not normal in the regular world. The plot itself is so strange that it's almost impossible to describe other than how I did just a second ago. And even then it was hard to do. Lain's intensely complex story allows for the viewer to look at it at face value and think about it and draw their own conclusions about the story. And I like a story that does that. Yeah, boo me all you want. I like when a story is thought-provoking and doesn't spoon-feed you everything. I wouldn't say that it's what I'd always want, but once in a while it's a good treat. Like ice cream during the winter or something. Anyway, my point is that the show is a really wide-open plot that revolves around mental illness, technology, and even conspiracy. Due to the nature of the show, Lain is something that requires you to constantly be watching. The show is very low on dialogue and presents much of its narrative through visuals and symbolism. If you take a second to look at your phone, you might miss a second of Lain looking at her phone, or her confronting scary spirit ghost things. Either could happen, seriously. Listen, I know what you're thinking. You're about to turn this off because it sounds like I'm presenting what's probably the most pretentious anime in all of history, right? Well, you're not incorrect. I won't deny that the show is pretty pretentious. The way it presents itself even from the first moment in the show, you can tell that it's going to be one of those shows. And while it is pretty pretentious and artsy, I don't seem to mind it that much. It's still a great show that makes you think about a lot of things. What are those things? Let me tell you. Lain's themes mainly revolve around The Wired. It's fairly obvious that this is supposed to represent this universe's internet from the beginning. Lain marries this concept of The Wired with its theme of reality. The Wired, like the internet, seems like it's simply a place for communication and information. However, in Lain, it's apparent that The Wired rapidly becomes a reality of its own, and it's brought into question quite often whether The Wired is an extension of the world as we know it, or perhaps the real world is an extension of The Wired. On top of that, it touches what it means to truly exist and evolve. It's also unsettling to watch Lain herself transform from a normal shy girl into a husk that is literally part of her own machine, and a part of a different reality entirely. This show's plot lines about The Wired can be seen as a parallel of the dangers of technological dependence in the world today. One must be aware of how much they depend on the internet, so that they don't begin to blend their online reality with the real world. The show obviously exaggerates this to a point. I mean, I'm not talking to dolls just because I use my phone to check Snapchat sometimes, but the point still stands. Honestly, it's interesting to see how well the show predicted modern times and our own concerns about technological dependency. That's right, you see that 4:3 aspect ratio. Serial Experiments Lain was made in 1998, which means this show is about as old as, me. Well, like I said, Lain is a very interesting case, and it's compelling to note how it touches on these themes 10 or so years before smartphones and other new technologies we tend to depend on. It's also important to point out Lain seems to also be suffering from some sort of dissociative identity disorder. Lain has a couple different personalities, but there's mostly the normal Lain, the shy girl with few friends, the Lain that exists in The Wired, which is more outgoing, charismatic, and has many friends. And then there's the evil, darker side of Lain, who likes to hurt Lain's friends and other people she likes. The show seems to want you to think about how much of this is Lain's own mental illness, and how the mental illness is magnified by the presence of The Wired, which seems to blend these personalities together and makes Lain's existence that much harder. Let's get a little more back on track and talk about the animation part of the anime. Like I said just a bit ago, Lain is old. I wouldn't say it hasn't aged, but I feel the aged animation helps somewhat with how the show presents itself. It has a unique style to it that really helps the mood and setting. This unique yet simple animation is complemented by its almost complete lack of sound. A lot of the times there's buzzing, computer whirring, or just strange general white noise that not only make the viewer uncomfortable, but also in some scenes really uneasy. Lain has some scenes that are borderline horror to me, and I'll admit that I had to pull the covers up and brace for a scare, which I knew wouldn't happen because of the nature of the show, but you never know. There's a lot I haven't mentioned about this show, and honestly, I've only scratched the surface of what has to be said. Despite how pretentious I think the show is, I think it's worth watching. I know it's definitely the ultimate not for everybody kind of show, but if you're willing to put the time into it and sit and really watch a show for all it's worth, Lain might just be right up your alley. It's a great watch and one of early anime's greats that have stood the test of time. Mostly because people have been discussing what it all really means online for like 21 years now. Seriously, even the creators have been avoiding talking about its meaning all this time. But anyway, I'm not the smartest bulb in the shed, but I was certainly able to piece together my own meaning for what this show stands for after a rewatch, and I'm sure you'll be able to as well. I hope. Serial Experiments Lain is definitely one of the artsier animes I've seen, and I feel like this show is one of the earliest and best examples of anime as an art form. I hope you can watch it as well and see what I mean by this. It's truly a great show and a work of art in my eyes. Serial Experiments Lain is an original animation work by the now defunct Triangle staff. It was written by Chiaki Konaka and directed by Ryutaro Nakamura, who unfortunately passed away in 2013. There's also a couple other pieces of Lain media. There's a video game for the PlayStation that I think takes place in an alternate timeline, along with a semi-official manga called The Nightmare of Fabrication, which also takes place in the video game timeline, I guess. Looks like I've got a lot of work to do. Well fellas, there's episode 4 of Animanga. If you have any anime you want me to take a look at, hop on your Navi and hit me up in the Wired or Twitter at ZTVGoofingOff with the hashtag Animanga. Until next present day or present time, I'll see you later.